Let me tell you something that might sound strange coming from a psychologist. The best gift you can give your children after the age of 70 is to stop needing them. Now, before you click away, hear me out. Because I don't mean stop loving them. I don't mean shut the door and never call. I mean something much deeper and much more freeing than that. I've been a practicing psychologist for over 40 years. I've sat across from thousands of people, many of them in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and I've noticed something that almost nobody talks about. There's a kind of suffering that happens in the later years of life that doesn't come from disease. It doesn't come from poverty. It comes from one quiet, invisible thing: waiting. Waiting for your son to call. Waiting for your daughter to visit. Waiting for someone, anyone, to remind you that you still matter. And I've watched that waiting slowly hollow people out. But I've also seen the opposite. I've seen men and women in their 70s and 80s who carry a kind of calm power. They love their children. They enjoy the visits. But when the phone doesn't ring, they're fine. They have a book to read, a friend to meet, a garden to tend, a life that belongs to them. That calm power, I call it quiet freedom. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how to build it, even if you think it's too late. It's not. Here's what happens to a lot of us after retirement. You spend 30, maybe 40 years raising your children. Your whole identity is wrapped up in being a parent. You wake up early to pack lunches. You drive to soccer practice. You worry about grades, about friends, about safety. Every decision you make runs through one filter: what's best for my kids? And then one day, they leave. And they should leave. That's the whole point. You raised them to be independent. You did your job. But nobody prepared you for what comes after. Your social circle shrinks. Your colleagues disappear. Maybe your spouse is dealing with their own health issues, or maybe they're already gone. And slowly, without realizing it, you start leaning on the one connection that still feels solid: your children. Now let me be clear, there's nothing wrong with having a close relationship with your adult children. That's beautiful. The problem starts when that relationship becomes your only source of meaning, your only source of emotional stability. In my practice, I've seen this take 3 forms. The first is emotional dependence. This is when your mood rises and falls based on whether your child called today. If they called, it's a good day. If they didn't, you feel forgotten, worthless, like you don't exist. The second is practical dependence. This is when you gradually stop doing things for yourself, not because you can't, but because it's easier to ask your son or daughter. You let them handle the bills, the appointments, the groceries. And each small surrender chips away at your confidence until you genuinely believe you can't manage on your own. The third, and this is the deepest one, is identity dependence. This is when the only way you can describe yourself is in relation to your children. I'm Michael's mother. I'm Sarah's father. Take that away, and you don't know who you are anymore. Here's the painful irony. The more you need your children, the more strain it puts on the relationship. They start to feel guilty. They feel suffocated. They pull away, not because they don't love you, but because the weight of being someone's entire emotional world is too heavy for anyone to carry. And then you feel even more abandoned. And you cling tighter. And they pull further away. It's a cycle. And it breaks hearts on both sides. But here's what I've seen again and again in 40 years of practice. The parents who are happiest in their 70s and 80s are not the ones whose children call every day. They're the ones who don't sit by the phone. Now I need to make something very clear, because this is where people get defensive. When I say not needing your children, I am not saying not loving your children. I'm not saying don't talk to them. I'm not saying pretend they don't exist. Here's the difference, and it's everything. Needing your children means when they call, you feel great. When they don't call, you fall apart. Not needing your children means when they call, you feel great. When they don't call, you're still okay. Because you have your own life, your own rhythm, your own reasons to get up in the morning. There's a term we use in psychology, emotional self-sufficiency. It means you have the internal resources to generate your own sense of stability, purpose, and connection. You're not dependent on a single external source to feel whole. And here's the beautiful thing about emotional self-sufficiency. It doesn't push people away. It actually draws them closer. Because when you're okay on your own, every interaction with your children becomes a choice, not a demand. It becomes a joy, not an obligation. That's what I mean by quiet freedom. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. You don't have to make a speech or start a revolution. You just have to reach a place inside yourself where you can say, honestly, I love my children, and I'm fine. So how do you get there? Let me walk you through 5 pillars. 5 things I've seen transform the lives of people well into their 70s and beyond. Pillar 1. Reclaim your identity beyond parent. Here's a question I want you to sit with. Who were you before your children came into this world? What did you love at 25 that you completely forgot by 65? Was it painting? Was it fishing? Was it reading novels late into the night? Was it playing an instrument? Traveling? Writing? Building things with your hands? Somewhere along the way, you put those things down. You had to, because your children needed you. But your children are grown now. And those parts of you didn't die. They're just dormant. I had a client once, a woman named Diane, 72 years old, who told me she felt like a ghost in her own house. She had no hobbies, no interests. She watched television and waited for her daughter to call. That was her life. I asked her, "What did you love doing before you had kids?" She went quiet for a long time. And then she said, "I used to write poetry." She hadn't written a single poem in 45 years. I told her to go home and write one. Just one. It didn't have to be good. The next week she came back with 3. Within 6 months she had joined a local writers group. She had friends. She had something to talk about that wasn't her daughter's schedule. She had a piece of herself back. Your identity as a parent is beautiful, but it was never supposed to be the only thing. You are more than someone's mother, more than someone's father. Go find the rest of yourself. It's still in there. Pillar 2. Build a chosen circle. Research has shown something very interesting. Older adults who have close friendships outside of their family consistently report higher levels of happiness than those who rely solely on family ties. Let that sink in for a moment. Your children love you. But they're busy. They have jobs, spouses, kids of their own. They cannot and should not be your entire social world. What you need is what I call a chosen circle. These are people you choose to have in your life. Not because of blood, but because of genuine connection. Maybe it's someone you walk with in the morning. Maybe it's a neighbor who comes over for coffee. Maybe it's a group at your church, your library, your community center. Maybe it's a fellow veteran, a fellow widow, a fellow gardener. Here's my rule of thumb. You need at least 2 or 3 people you can call on any given day who are not your children. These people won't replace your family, but they'll take the pressure off your family. And that pressure release? It changes everything. If you don't have those people yet, that's okay. Finding them is a skill, and like any skill, it can be learned. Show up somewhere regularly. Say yes to invitations even when you don't feel like it. Be the one who initiates. It feels awkward at first. It gets easier. Pillar 3. Master the practical. Refuse to be helpless. Every skill you keep is a piece of freedom you keep. I mean that literally. Can you manage your own medication schedule? Can you handle your basic finances, pay a bill, balance a checkbook, understand your insurance? Can you use your phone to make a video call? Can you get yourself to a doctor's appointment? Every time you hand one of those tasks to your children, not because you physically cannot do it, but because it's easier to let them handle it, you are giving away a small piece of your autonomy. And here's what I've seen happen. It starts with one thing. You ask your daughter to set up your new phone. Then you ask her to schedule your appointments. Then she's managing your medications. Then she's making your financial decisions. And before you know it, you've become helpless. Not because you are helpless, but because you practiced helplessness until it became real. I'm not talking about situations where you genuinely need medical assistance or physical support. That's different. I'm talking about the slow, voluntary surrender of capability that happens when it's just easier to let someone else do it. Fight that. Every single day, fight that. Learn one new thing on your phone this week. Call your own doctor. Sort your own pills. Drive yourself to the store if you can. These aren't small things. These are acts of freedom. Every time you say, "I can't do that anymore," without actually trying, you give away a piece of who you are. Pillar 4. Develop an inner life. This is the pillar most people skip. And it might be the most important one. Can you sit alone in a room with no television, no phone, no noise, and feel at peace? If you can, you possess something incredibly rare. If you can't, this is the work. There is a world of difference between solitude and loneliness. Loneliness is when you're alone and it feels like punishment. Solitude is when you're alone and it feels like nourishment. The shift from one to the other doesn't happen by accident. It happens when you develop what I call an inner life, a relationship with your own thoughts, your own memories, your own sense of meaning. Some people find this through faith or prayer. Some find it through meditation. Some find it through journaling, simply writing down what they're thinking and feeling. Some find it through long walks in nature, where the rhythm of their steps quiets the noise in their mind. The method doesn't matter. What matters is that you have somewhere to go inside yourself. A place that doesn't depend on anyone else showing up. Because the truth is, there will be hours in your life when nobody is around. Nobody calls. Nobody visits. And in those hours, you'll either feel abandoned or you'll feel free. The difference is entirely in what you've built within yourself. Pillar 5. Rewrite the story you tell yourself. In my work, I've learned that the story you tell yourself about your life matters more than almost anything else. And many older adults carry a story that sounds something like this. I sacrificed everything for my children. I gave them the best years of my life. Now it's their turn to take care of me. Let me be honest with you, that story isn't wrong. You did sacrifice. You did give. And your children should be grateful. But here's the problem. That story puts you in the role of someone who is owed something. Someone who is waiting to collect a debt. And a person who is waiting to collect a debt is not free. They're a creditor. And creditors spend their lives watching the account, checking the balance, feeling shortchanged. I want you to consider a different story. One that goes like this. I raised my children. I did my job, and I did it well. That chapter is complete. And now, my life is still mine. I have years left. I have mornings left. I have choices left. And I'm going to use them. That story doesn't erase what you gave. It honors it. And then, it sets you free from it. You are not a bill your children need to pay. You are a person with a life to live. Let me share 2 stories from my practice. I've changed the names, of course. Margaret was 74. After her husband passed, she started calling her daughter 3, sometimes 4 times a day. Her daughter loved her, but she was drowning. She had 2 young kids, a full-time job, and a mother who needed constant reassurance that she was still loved. Eventually, the daughter started letting calls go to voicemail. And Margaret would sit there, staring at the phone, spiraling into despair. When Margaret came to me, she said, "My daughter doesn't care about me anymore." But that wasn't true. Her daughter cared deeply. She was just exhausted. We worked together to rebuild Margaret's world. She joined a community gardening group. She learned to use a tablet, watched YouTube, read the news, played word games. She made friends at the garden. She started having things to talk about beyond, "Why didn't you call?" And something remarkable happened. Her daughter started calling more, not out of guilt, but because talking to Margaret had become enjoyable again. Because Margaret had things to share. Because the calls felt light instead of heavy. Then there was Robert, 78. 3 sons, all living in different states. His wife had been gone 5 years. He told me, "I feel like I'm just waiting to die." Robert didn't need therapy as much as he needed a purpose. We talked about his life before retirement. He'd been an engineer, a veteran, a man who built things. I asked him what he'd want to build now. He started writing. Not professionally, just his memories. Stories from the Navy. Stories from raising 3 boys in a small Ohio town. He joined a veterans group that met at the local VFW hall. The last time I saw Robert, he said something I'll never forget. He said, "I stopped being a burden and became a person again." That's the shift. That's the quiet freedom. Now I know some of you are watching this and thinking, "That's fine for healthy people, but I have real health problems. I actually need help." And you're right. If you need physical help, get it. Accept it. There is no shame in that. But here's what I want you to see. Needing help with your body is not the same as needing someone to fill your soul. You can accept a ride to the doctor and still have emotional independence. You can let your son manage your medications and still have your own identity, your own friends, your own inner life. The pillars I've described aren't about doing everything alone. They're about being someone, not just someone's parent. Some of you might be thinking, "My culture says children should take care of their parents." I respect that deeply. Many cultures hold this value, and it's beautiful. But there's a difference between a child who chooses to care for you out of love and a child who feels trapped into caring for you out of guilt. The first builds connection. The second builds resentment. When you develop your own freedom, you give your children the space to love you freely. And free love, that's the only kind worth having. And for those of you thinking, "It's too late for me," I want to speak directly to you. In 40 years of practice, I have never, not once, met a person for whom it was truly too late. I've met people who were 75 and started painting for the first time. I've met people who were 80 and made their first real friend in decades. I've met people who were nearly 90 and finally stopped waiting by the phone and found peace. It's not too late. Not for you. So let me leave you with this. Quiet freedom is not a destination you arrive at all at once. It's built one small choice at a time. One morning where you get up and do something for yourself. One afternoon where you call a friend instead of waiting for your child to call you. One evening where you sit in silence and realize you're okay. It stands on 5 pillars: reclaiming your identity, building your chosen circle, mastering the practical, developing your inner life, and rewriting the story you tell yourself. None of them are complicated. All of them take courage. So here's my challenge to you this week. Just one thing. Do one thing you would normally ask your children to do. It can be small. Schedule your own appointment. Go to the store. Fix something in the house. Call a friend you haven't spoken to in months. And when you do it, notice how it feels. Notice the small, quiet spark of, "I did that myself." That spark is the beginning of your freedom. Your children don't owe you their life. And you don't owe yours to waiting for them. You still have a life. A real one, with mornings and choices and possibilities. Live it. And if this video meant something to you, if even one sentence made you stop and think, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment below and tell me, what is one thing you've started doing for yourself again? I read every comment. And I'll be right here, next week, with more. Until then, take care of yourself. Not because no one else will, because you can.